Everything you hear in this story is fictional. Any resemblance to any persons or events is purely coincidental.
The Cold Case of Katie Christie.
Episode 1. 7 decades ago, towards the end of the year 2017, a woman in the United Kingdom named Katie Christie was murdered. Until now, her case has remained unsolved. Hers is a name very few will be familiar with, making it hard to believe that for a few months between December 2017 and early 2018, half of the UK knew it. The discovery of a young woman's partially clothed body in the River Severn was always going to be a disturbing, headline-worthy story. But it became all the more tragic when the media learned Katie was never reported missing prior to her body being found. The entire affair existed now, decades later, as a fossilized news cycle, a lesson on the ephemeral cruelty of the early century internet, the kind of thing usually endlessly recompressed by future generations into memes and A-level exam questions. 30 million people saw the blurry CCTV freeze frame of Katie walking by the canal near her home, sporting a large, raggedy handbag over her shoulder, while her hands dug into an open packet of quavers. It was the last image of her alive. For a day or two, it was the most searched image in the UK. #LastQuavers trended. There were think pieces about how brands should respond to tragedy, and then think pieces about how trivial things gain importance in the face of someone's last day. It wasn't long before the articles and memes that began from Katie's disappearance didn't mention her at all. From the first report of a 27-year-old woman's body being found in the River Severn, both traditional and online media outlets pounced. When a name was put to the victim, the story exploded in its perceived deliciousness. Katie's social media pages showed a pretty girl who went on boats in Greece and got bottle service in London. She was always in large groups, smiling big as she posed for shots where arms were flung around her shoulders as she occupied the center of the frame. There was sure to be an explosion of posts coming in from one of her 3,000 Instagram friends, detailing the high-flying life she led, the personality behind the glossy pictures, and most importantly, providing a very healthy list of suspects for online sleuths to dig their claws into. The last image of Katie alive caused a flurry on Twitter, where many overly active accounts eagerly anticipated new information to start their informal investigative process. Yet, the last photo of Katie alive was released by police, and then there was a long stretch of days where nothing was released at all. There were no social posts, outside of the one from the partner of Katie's brother, asking for prayers and privacy. Her mother spoke to the media just once, and the police quickly revealed that Katie spent most of her days working as a real estate agent and living alone, saving all of her leave and money to travel whenever she could get a 3-day weekend throughout the year. She had no boyfriend, no money, no friends willing to call themselves such. The internet eagerly devoured every detail of Katie's murder, but finding nothing substantial, swiftly lost interest in solving the mystery they'd been so eager to unravel just days earlier. Katie's online presence gave few clues to how she lived her day-to-day life in Birmingham. Her social media seemed reserved for showing moments of the few short trips she poured her salary into every year, and the parties she managed to get invited to in London. After the police revealed that they believed the suspect was a stranger to the victim, the buzz of amateur sleuthing faded from social media. By the end of 2018, just a year after Katie's body was found, no one remembered the details. Not the half-baked police statements, not the comments from her mother telling the world her daughter had no friends or enemies, not even the bracelet that was the vital clue in the case. What survived was just this: a young woman went missing and later turned up dead, and nobody could really remember if they found who did it. It was retroactively dubbed the Invisible Girl Case by an online true crime collective, and even that nickname faded into digital obscurity. In the early hours of December 1st, 2017, a woman taking her dogs for a walk just outside the town of Stourport-on-Severn saw what she first thought was a doll in the water trapped against a fallen tree. A scream was let out on closer inspection, soon followed by a call to the police.
Emergency, which service?
Katie had been missing for 3 days when her body was discovered, having last been captured by a neighbour's security camera, leaving her home around 8 p.m. on Friday, November 28th, as she was on her way to a birthday party. Katie's body was found just past the convergence of the River Stour and the River Severn, which made it maddeningly difficult for investigators to confirm the location it would have entered the water. Days of searching for a disturbance to find where she might have gone in turned up nothing, a storm having washed away any clues. Katie had been expected to go to the birthday party of a friend the Friday night she went missing, but the festivities came and went without her attendance. Her colleagues noted she had been her usual chirpy self that day, and her phone showed she had fired off a messenger note to confirm she was on her way to the party in the group chat. Less than 14 minutes after sending that message, her phone lost signal and was later found in a canal 1 mile from her home. Her trajectory suggested she was heading to her local train station, though she was never spotted on any platform or train. When they found her, she was dressed only in underwear, a nasty bruise curving along the back of her skull. The post-mortem would tell investigators she'd drowned, almost certainly knocked unconscious and then thrown into the river. The one piece of evidence that baffled everyone was the slender silver bracelet clasped around her wrist, crowned by a tiny heart charm. Katie's mother insisted her daughter hadn't worn it in years, claimed she'd lost it, but there it was, gleaming in the morgue's harsh light. Colleagues and acquaintances all swore they hadn't seen it on Katie for at least 3 years. Why it resurfaced that night remained a stubborn mystery, partially due to investigators struggling to believe the bracelet was truly lost for those years. From Katie's mother to her boss to her friend whose birthday she was due to attend that fateful Friday night. They all got things wrong about Katie. Facts that are indisputably right about her are as follows. Catherine Eleanor Christie was born on February 22nd, 1990, to parents Karen and Thomas Christie. She had one older brother, Justin. They were, by all accounts, an ordinary middle-class family who lived just over the Welsh border in Newtown. After their father died, when Katie was 19, the siblings drifted in separate directions. Justin settling in London with his partner, Katie forging a career as a real estate agent in Birmingham. She lived alone, in a modest one-bed flat, while her mother stayed behind in Newtown, unwilling or unable to leave behind the memories they'd all shared. Detectives probed the bracelet's origin, but Karen could only recall it as a birthday gift from a childhood friend whose name had slipped her mind. The simple chain wasn't valuable, yet it had meant something to Katie once, and maybe meant something to whoever returned it to her wrist that night. Inside her flat, they found a well-worn diary, pages crowded with longings for deeper connections, but nothing that pointed the finger at any one person or explained why she had started wearing the bracelet again. Despite the case seizing national attention for a few months after Katie's body was found, an arrest was never made. The closest police came to a suspect was a known sex offender, Nick Schoner, spotted in Bridge North with his car near the Severn on the afternoon Katie vanished, but there was no hard evidence tying him to her death. The following months turned into years without the announcement of any new suspects. Karen was interviewed on This Morning on the 1-year anniversary, which briefly saw some interest brought back to the case, particularly the timeline of the day Katie disappeared. Karen confirmed she had seen her daughter that Friday afternoon, after she'd been at an open house not too far from Newtown. She had visited her mother at her childhood home for approximately 45 minutes before she drove home to get ready for the party, with security cameras proving she made it there just before 7. She sent a message to the party group chat to say she was on her way at 8:02 p.m, corroborated by the time she was seen leaving the house. 8 minutes later, passers-by saw her walking south along the Dudley Canal towpath. 4 minutes after that, her phone fell silent forever. Everything she'd brought with her, coat, bag, even shoes, turned up half a mile downstream. The bracelet found on her body was not seen by any cameras or passers-by due to her long coat, and remained the greatest clue in her case. Almost 50 years went by, and the bracelet still sat in the cold case files of West Mercia Police Station. In 2064, there were still no solid leads or suspects. Katie's mother was long dead, and her brother was now an old man who made peace that he would never know who had killed his sister. But despite there no longer being anybody looking into Katie's case, there were still a few people who remembered what had happened and wondered if there'd ever been any justice for her. One was a man named Josh, who had worked at a bar with Katie when they were both 18. In 2064, Josh was 74 years old and living in Stoke. His wife Tess had died the year prior, and he was semi-retired from his job as a visual games artist, though he still liked to keep an eye on things in his gaming company named Complex to keep himself busy from time to time. Never one to be content sitting still, Josh had become obsessed with entering the virtual reality experience, nostalgia. He'd wanted to try it for years, but with his newfound free time, it became a need more than a desire. Nostalgia is a virtual reality program that enables users to go back in time and experience the past. It was revolutionary in the virtual experience world. Prior to Nostalgia, coming out in 2038, there were plenty of VR games that allowed users to experience worlds with hyper-realistic sound and visuals. Nostalgia not only brought the other three senses, touch, smell and taste, into the mix with startling accuracy, it also recreated the past so vividly, users could experience history as though they were actually there. When you were inside Nostalgia, you experienced the world as a digital version of yourself. On its initial release in 2038, only 5 past events were on offer. They were the 1969 moon landing, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the night of Y2K going into 2000, the final match of the 2002 World Cup in Japan, and the final day of the 2033 AI wars in Silicon Valley. Initially, these events were recreated using only datasets that Nostalgia founders were able to acquire. But over time, Nostalgia was able to create technology that could scan a person's brain and turn their memories into datasets. This advancement is what set the Nostalgia program off towards being the largest virtual reality experience in the world. Nostalgia programmers worked with NASA to recreate the moon landing as accurately as possible through the videos, reports, and system data that they were able to acquire. They were able to digitally render the physical spaces of the moon landing expedition remarkably well with this alone. Inside Apollo 11, the 1960s NASA headquarters, the moon's surface itself were all rendered to near perfection. When it came to the astronauts or other people who were on the ground as part of the expedition, the program could only render versions of the people who had been there and how they acted based on the limited data they had. Video footage, written accounts, and shift logs were used to add representations of the people who were present during the original event to the experience. This meant the program showed a most likely scenario for users who entered the moon landing experience, but could not be relied upon to give a sense of the true conversations had or movements made by individuals. The problem was, nobody had been part of the moon landing expedition who was still alive in the 2040s to offer their memories to the program. This wasn't the case for the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall and the events that followed. Nostalgia was able to combine acquired data from these events from the memory scans of those who had been there. These scans enabled real memories to be added to the dataset, and the recreation became all the more accurate. The experience was so startling that Nostalgia immediately gained many investors and was able to expand its offering at an astronomical rate. What started as 5 events quickly grew to 50 events within 2 years. And by the time the 2060s rolled around, Nostalgia was offering users the opportunity to go back in time to any moment from 1980 onwards, as well as over 120 recreated events from prior to 1980. This astonishing offering was only made possible by the many people who opted into Nostalgia's memory scan when entering the program. The more people who gave their memories, the wider and more accurate the offering became. During 2064, Nostalgia was booming. Of course, it's still doing very well today, but a key difference back then was that it was much more expensive. It took a long time for Nostalgia to be as easily accessible to the general public as it is now. In the 2060s, it was something that only the rich could afford, or normal folks who saved up a lot of cash. Josh had been dying to try Nostalgia for years, having been a tech and gaming enthusiast his entire life. Born in 1990, the same year as Katie, Josh grew up on PlayStation and old computer games like Age of Empires 2, which were pioneers of their time. In his teens, he taught himself how to create his own characters for a video game universe, which would lead him into his career in adulthood. The games available in the 2060s would have blown the mind of the little boy who played PlayStation. Of course, most of them weren't even called games at that point because of advances in virtual reality. Instead, they had become experiences. Nostalgia became the most highly sought-after experience of them all. The idea of entering a program that could mimic past events so accurately you'd feel as though you were really there was an irresistible dream to Josh. However, due to the costs, he had never had the chance to get inside the experience. The average 12-hour nostalgia experience cost more than a university degree at the time. Josh had been willing to save for many years, but his wife Tess had always been against it when they still had 2 children to support. He did agree, but it killed him every time he heard about someone he knew getting a chance to go inside. And he certainly wasn't alone. Everybody wanted to try nostalgia at least once. There were a lot of people who wanted to go back for a specific reason, seeing a loved one again, experiencing a favorite day for a second time. But most just wanted to try the experience for itself. Josh was in the latter camp. He wanted to see the graphics, feel the senses, and compare his memory to the program in minute detail. The idea of being young again for a day didn't hurt either. Josh didn't think of himself as nostalgic, not in the melting, sentimental sense, anyway. If anything, he prided himself on a disciplined ability to repress the past into well-maintained archives, accessed only in emergencies or bouts of strategic self-pity. But with Tess gone, and the house gone silent, he found himself trawling memory like it was the only current left pulling towards the future. Memories had become a source of entertainment, but not comfort. He could remember, but he didn't want to do much confronting. It's why nostalgia seemed so appealing. A curated past was easier to sit with than a messy present. He had many ideas about which day he'd choose to return if he had the chance. His best days were all with Tess and the kids, but with Tess only having died the year before, it was too painful to consider going back to one of these. He didn't like the idea of going into the experience as a user, and Tess only being a memory. Given the cost, Josh had been pushing his group of friends to go in together so they could afford it. They had 50 years of memories together. It was a true treasure trove of adventures to pick from. Wouldn't it be great to go back to their youth and have a wild night out together again? He kept saying every time they got together, and they would all laugh and agree, but had varying levels of enthusiasm. Now with Tess gone, the group decided it was time to give nostalgia a go to keep Josh's spirits up. There were 6 of them, including Josh, in the group now without Tess. Manu, Ashley, Ben, Mav, and Nicolina. When Manu first arrived in Mrs. Langford's grade 2 classroom, he stood in the hallway, eyes wide as if the fluorescent lights might flicker out and swallow him whole. His dark hair was slicked back, his hands tucked into pockets of a new plaid shirt, and he trembled whenever the teacher called his name. Josh hovered at the back of the room. He'd never known a kid so timid he flinched at a friendly good morning. Everything changed at craft time, when cardboard sheets and markers spilled across the tables, and everyone had to draw their favourite character. Manu quickly got sketching a stoic man with glasses and a crowbar. Gordon Freeman from Half-Life. Josh couldn't believe someone his age knew the game. Leaning over the table, Josh asked, "You play Half-Life?" and watched the fear drain from Manu's face. His stuttered answer tumbled into a full-throated conversation about headcrabs and level design. And just like that, shy little Manu became Josh's friend for life. When the boys got to high school, they became a trio when they met Mav. He was the wild card of the 3. He'd vanish for months, no calls, no texts, and then reappear at midnight house parties in a leather jacket, hair mussed, telling half-true stories about remote shrines he'd explored. He married 5 times in as many years. A quick trip to the registry office in Manchester, a sunset ceremony on a beach in Cornwall. Always spectacular, always over as soon as it began. He never had kids, and we all nodded silently when it came up. Nobody wanted to ask if that was by design or by accident. Mav couldn't keep track of his own calendar, much less a marriage vow. Manu met his wife Ashley at a music festival in their early 20s. They were inseparable ever after. Strolling into the bar where Josh tended stools every Friday night, Manu perched on the end of the counter, handing Ashley free plays on the dartboard he'd fixed behind the bar. Soon she brought her cousin Tess along and introduced Josh to the sweet girl who would become his wife. Ben showed up at university, leaning against the column in the old stone courtyard, textbook open, but eyes drifting towards clusters of students passing by. He had a mysterious sort of charm that only worked for people with hard jawlines and lean bodies. He didn't speak much, always preferring to survey than participate too eagerly. Yet when he did decide to pipe up, he'd have the room in the palm of his hand. And finally there was Nicolina, Ashley's high school best friend, a force of nature with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper tongue. She'd been engaged 3 times, each ring bigger and more elaborate than the last, yet she'd never walked down an aisle. When her ex-fiancé tried to challenge her for the custody of their daughter Alette, Nicolina stormed the courtroom in a leather pencil skirt and heels, papers in hand, eyes flashing. She won full custody of Alette, who grew up to be just as tenacious as her mother. By 42, Alette was CEO of the country's largest digital publisher. Out of the 6 friends, only Ashley had ever stepped foot inside Nostalgia. Working in the company's data forensics department for 20 years meant she was able to receive employees' benefits, including a free experience every 3 months. Still, she'd never given her memories over to the program. It was hard to justify more visits when one experience alone ran higher than her monthly pay. The group came to a fairly quick and easy decision when discussing what they'd like to go back to in Nostalgia. Manu's 24th birthday, which was spent at Park Days Music Festival in England's southeast in 2014, was a weekend the group had reminisced about over the years. It was where Manu had met Ashley, bringing their 2 groups together and forming lifelong bonds. When it came to giving their memories over to the program, opinions varied. Nicolina jumped at the chance. She longed to relive her 22-year-old body for a day. Manu was hesitant. As a man of science who had seen far too often how facts could be manipulated, he decided to opt out. Ashley had never witnessed any evidence of memory tampering or misuse in her years working at Nostalgia, but understood her husband's reservations just the same. She hadn't given her memories over when she'd gone in previously, as she felt like it was spooky for her employer to have too much information on her, and this reservation had stayed despite no longer being with the company. Ben, who had to stop drinking years ago due to health issues, craved one last wild weekend, but distrusted any corporate or government tech, so he opted out. Mav, who should have stopped drinking years ago but never did, followed suit. His memories would have been useless anyway, so Josh didn't mind. Between Nicolina's memories and his own, he figured there'd be enough detail to make the experience quite accurate. They had also invited Ben's wife Amina, who had often attended events with the group throughout their life, but never became fully enmeshed. She was an introverted sort who didn't like big groups, so she opted out. They collectively chose to start the experience from 5 p.m. on Saturday the 6th of September 2014. Ashley and Manu had always bonded over their shared love of music, and they still had a record of the acts who played that night. They suggested 5 p.m., which would give plenty of time to look around before the main acts got going, and plenty of time to party, then to revel in the afterglow together before they had to come out. None of them slept until Sunday night when they did this the first time around anyway. It seemed such a foreign and frankly quite laughable concept to a bunch of 70-year-olds to stay awake for a full 24 hours, but their memories all served them well. It was part of the fun, getting to remember how it felt to be young physically. Josh wondered how it would feel emotionally. Would this be as enjoyable as the first time around? He anticipated having a great time, but this wouldn't be because of the music or the drugs or the dancing, but because of the freedom. Manu had commented on what it would mean for people's experience of time once the general public got to experience nostalgia fully. How much of our collective view of history would change? How much would our understanding of time as a linear construct fall away? It was certainly the conversation of the moment. The idea of time being a man-made construct was surely not a new discussion, but programs like Nostalgia had pushed it into the zeitgeist in the 2040s. Josh was more interested in how inaccuracies would become facts if there were flaws in the code, which there were bound to be. Nostalgia did have many code flaws that had already popped up at the time, but none of them had been a big enough deal to cause any major losses to their reputation. There may be a minute or two of feeling ill or strange while your brain and body adjust to their new reality. If you die in the experience, you will not die in real life, but the experience will end. If you exhibit or promote violence or antisocial behavior within the experience, you will be pulled out, etc., etc. There was nothing particularly frightening in there for Josh, but everyone else in the group looked a little scared. Ashley had printed out the nostalgia briefing pack for everyone, color-coded and annotated with notes about how to avoid memory distortion as a way to make everyone more calm about the experience. She was like that, always thorough, always one step ahead. She felt like every negative emotion could be managed with the right level of preparedness. And for those events in life she couldn't see coming, she would face with a quickly constructed but carefully assembled plan. It was no wonder she became a data analyst with a penchant for true crime on the side. Next was the most important part of all, the memory scans. They were each led into individual pods where their experience capsules resided. In Josh's pod, there was a doctor's chair with a helmet-like contraption attached sitting behind his capsule. As the assistant directed Josh towards the chair, he wondered if Nicolina was nervous being the only other member of the group who had volunteered to scan their brain. It should only take 5 minutes, and another minute for the data to be loaded into the nostalgia system before they could all enter the experience. Memory scans were not compulsory to enter nostalgia, but they were highly encouraged for 2 key reasons. The first, and the primary one that the company promoted, was that it made the experience far richer for the user if they were going back to a memory. Their brain stored information their mind wouldn't remember. The colour of their university dorm couch, the sound of their English teacher's voice, the order in which they had dinner and watched a film. Nostalgia with a brain scan meant an experience the company promoted as being as close to your own as it could get. The second reason brain scans were encouraged was that the more data nostalgia could aggregate, the more accurate the program became, which in turn meant more users and greater profits. There had been many privacy and security concerns in the memory scanning process that had dominated the news headlines for years. Many people had secrets that could destroy lives or put national securities at risk. Most people had embarrassing moments they didn't want immortalized forever. The nostalgia programmers had worked hard in making the memory scanning process as transparent, secure, and ethical as possible in order to encourage user uptake. Nostalgia had created a series of options for a memory scan user, called a B user for short, to opt in or out from prior to their experience. A user could identify specific memories that they didn't want to be included in the program, like a moment of indiscretion or a trip in front of a crowd. It could do a blanket ban for recurring elements in their lives. For example, it could remove every time someone danced around their house, or anything that occurred at their place of work. It could remove information pertaining to certain events, like any moments that showed a bad haircut you got from your mother in high school. But the catch with these removals was they could only be removed from a user's personal scan. If a user removed a memory of themselves missing a game-winning shot in front of a crowd, the memory would only stay out of nostalgia as long as any of those members of the crowd had not volunteered their own memories. For this reason, it was advised and generally accepted that only memories where you were alone or with very few people were worthy of removing. If an active user inside the nostalgia experience came across a scene that was not a true representation of the moment due to a removal, then a red pulsing dot would appear in the upper right portion of their vision. The red dot alerted the active user that what they were seeing inside the experience was an altered version of the event. Above all the standards, Josh had chosen to leave almost everything else in. He figured nobody needed to know about the risky business reenactment he did when he was home alone, so he got rid of that. The only other thing he decided to remove was for Tess. She had lost her sister Jasmine when she was a teenager, and Tess, while being the funniest, most loving person in the world, always carried a deep pain and anger over it. Josh didn't think it was his information to share, and he knew Tess wouldn't have wanted private information about it out there for the world to discover. So those memories all went, except for one. Tess always said Jasmine loved music, and there was a time when he caught Tess singing to her sister while gardening and thinking nobody else was home. It was a small testament to Tess, and to Jasmine to a lesser extent. Josh thought his wife would have liked that. The assistant told Josh he didn't have to do anything but lie back and relax once the helmet had been placed on his head. The program would do it all for him. In the time it took between Josh to take the helmet off and to climb into the capsule, the assistant had told him his memory scan data had been added to nostalgia. There were a few moments of silence and darkness before a bright daylight emerged. It appeared in Josh's vision like one of those old eye tests, with a scene far in the distance surrounded by black. Over the course of about 10 seconds, it approached before it made up Josh's entire vision. This was a piece of code nostalgia programmers had included, so the transition into the experience could be smooth for users. It was too much for the brain to go from total darkness and silence to a vibrant and loud world in an instant. Josh heard the sound of a thumping bass as the image of a grassy field filled with tents approached. At first he thought it must have been coming from a nearby stage at the festival, but once the image filled out completely, he realized it was from a handheld speaker. He was at their campsite. Josh looked down at himself. He was wearing a striped shirt with the top few buttons undone. He knew the kids these days would laugh at the chunky trainers he had on. He brought his hands up and marveled at the buttery smooth skin and started to laugh. He heard another laugh beside him and looked up to see young Manu doing exactly the same thing he was. Manu's eyes went wide as they connected with Josh's. They laughed, and Josh gave his old friend a joyous hug. Josh looked around to find Ben and Max. It took a moment before they emerged from a path behind their tent, each holding 4 drinks in plastic cups. The group let out an unbridled cheer as they saw each other. Nostalgia had dropped them into the exact spot they had been at 5 p.m. The girls would just be walking through the front entrance, as they didn't stay at the campsite, but in an Airbnb nearby. Nicolina wasn't a fan of sharing with others, especially bathrooms and personal space. The boys downed a drink each as they looked around the field of tents and all the people dressed in long-gone festival fashion. Their conversation was a mix of, "Can you believe it? It really feels real. I know everyone says that, but I was expecting something to be off. I can feel the wind on my arm hairs. And these shorts, I haven't thought of them once in 45 years, and here they are on my body." Before they entered nostalgia, the group had all agreed to meet at the big tree by the right of the main stage just before 7 p.m. It was the same tree they had used as a meet-up point the first time they did this. Josh had planned on getting moving to look around as soon as possible to make the most of the 2 hours, but the merriment of the whole thing with the others was too much of a pull, and they all ended up staying together. Nicolina wanted to go to the disco tent. It was an all-day rave that played remixed disco music. It was the tent where the party never died, full of men and reflective surfaces. She wanted to admire herself and feel admired. It had been so long. She looked in the mirrors at her platinum blonde hair that fell straight and ended right below her waist, paired with the longest legs Mab thought he had ever seen. Black pieces of pleather were crisscrossed over her body to make up an eye-popping outfit that left little to the imagination. She felt every man look her way and reveled in it. She remembered the way all 4 of the male friends she was with had looked at her when they first saw her, like she was heaven. Ben was the only one she had ever given serious consideration back. The problem was that he was too much like her, and had plenty of options himself. Mav went off in search of those mysterious best friends he'd made that nobody ever really believed were real. While the others danced in the disco tent, Josh walked around the outside taking it all in. He was looking for anybody else who had the light glowing above their head, signaling they were an A user, that is, a user who is actively inside nostalgia, rather than simply being a memory. He didn't see any other A users before 7 p.m. hit, which surprised him. It was unlikely to see anybody else in the experience when you'd gone to a specific event that was special to you personally, but not culturally. This was for 2 reasons. One is that most people had different moments that were most important to them in their lives that they wanted to go back to. The second was that it also required users to choose to go to the event at the exact time another user did. The best chance you had at running into another in-play user was going to a popular past cultural event, like the 1985 Live Aid concert. Given there were approximately 2 million active users inside Nostalgia at any given time, Josh still expected to see at least one other user at Park Days. If anything, it only proved to him how expansive the program really was. By the time the group made it to the main stage at 7 p.m, they were giddy. It was the most tangible form of a surreal feeling any of them had ever felt. They drank, they danced, they got high. Nostalgia guaranteed a feeling akin to the expected effects of alcohol or drugs without the negatives. You would not experience a hangover, nor would you be able to overdose. There was a ceiling of euphoria you could reach, but most people never got near it. They spent the next 5 hours in a euphoric state on the dance floor. They'd all agreed the boys had met the girls for the first time on a dance floor in the circus tent around 12:30 a.m. and wanted to be there at the same time. Josh felt a flickering of deja vu as he moved with the crowd from the main stage to the circus tent after the last act on the main stage finished at midnight. Blistering beats radiated from the muddy fields up their legs. Green flashing strobes provided the only light in the place, giving the sense of life happening in small, fractured moments. Manu remembered seeing Ashley for the first time, jumping up and down perfectly in time with the beat, her long dark hair in perfect tableaus every time the light moved. But it was Nicolina that he'd seen first, Ashley's best friend since high school, her impossibly long legs and ridiculously perfect body barely covered by all that zigzagged material. She was impossible not to notice. Those versions of Ashley and Nicolina did not exist in this experience. An echo is the name given to the representation of a person inside Nostalgia and mimics the actions of that person as they were during the original event. If someone who experienced an event went back to experience again via Nostalgia, their echo was removed in favor of their active user. It's why it looked so odd when they all noticed Shanti dancing across the room by herself, in the exact same spot she'd been with Nicolina and Ashley that first night. Most of them had forgotten she'd been here. Shanti was a friend of Ashley's, having worked bar shifts together since they had left high school. Shanti's keys dropped from her bag while she danced, and Josh remembered the same thing happening back then. It was how they'd initially approached, how Ben had approached anyway. He was always the first to seize a moment with a girl. He wondered what would happen now, when Shanti was the only one of them that was a memory and not a user. Would her keys just stay on the floor? Ben, moving instinctively, picked the keys up. Shanti said thank you and said hi to the boys. She didn't acknowledge Nicolina and Ashley because in her head, she was already dancing with them. Josh remembered how Ben had only introduced himself back then and began talking to the girls for a few minutes before Mav got frustrated at his lack of introduction and came in over the top, allowing the rest of them to say hello. "Ben's forgotten his manners, sorry ladies," Mav had said, and they'd all laughed. Josh couldn't remember if Ben did too. This was how it all was. The music, the lights, the staring at Nicolina. And they weren't the only ones. It was how they got invited to the after party in the first place. Brandon Stone from Easy Tricks had seen Nicolina in the crowd from backstage and had sent his assistant over asking if the group wanted to come back to the VIP tent afterwards. All the artists that played at the festival that day would be there. They'd readily agreed and they'd followed Brandon's assistant out of the circus tent to the far side of the festival grounds. Nestled between trees was a small tent, but it had the same blistering music as the bigger ones, causing the ground around it to pulsate. They were shown in, and Josh guessed there were probably no more than 120 people in here. Almost immediately, he spotted Windstorm, who had been the main act for the night. He was flanked by two men. Josh couldn't tell if they were friends or bodyguards, but they were dressed almost exactly like Windstorm. The rest of the people surrounding him were girls, almost definitely recruits to the VIP tent like they had been. Josh noticed Ben surveying the group as well, though seemingly with less pure intentions. Ben gave him a wink, and Josh laughed. While the group waited for drinks to be poured at the bar, Josh surveyed the Windstorm posse. He had always had a mild fascination with the lifestyles of the rich and famous, like anyone did. It wasn't something he'd ever desired for himself, a dorky computer sort, but an alternate version of him may have liked it. One of the girls in Windstorm's posse laughed loudly, and Josh realized it was familiar. He peered over, seeing the girl retract her hand from Windstorm as she spoke with a giggle. Her long, curly, dark hair moved with her, and when she tossed it back behind her shoulder, Josh went still. The feeling of euphoria seemed to stop. It was incredible. Even while feeling the faux effects of alcohol, the program could mimic the instantly sobering feeling of seeing someone you didn't expect. Katie Christie. It was Katie Christie laughing with Windstorm. He'd forgotten she'd been here. All the memories he had of her in his younger years had blurred together, and he hadn't realized one of them had been on this night. He barely ever knew her well. She was just a girl he'd worked a pub job with, who he'd bump into from time to time. She was always nice, Katie. She always said hi. Suddenly, Katie looked in his direction. Her trademark smile that was too big for her face appeared, and she started to run over to him.
Josh?
She gave him a hug, and Josh could barely get an arm up to her back in response. He got out a greeting as he remembered that this had in fact happened back then. Seeing Katie and her running over like this, he felt guilty for always finding her a little boring. A nice girl, but generic, he always thought. She was pretty though, which was why he supposed she was in here. Katie started to talk to him about how she was friends with another one of the performers, which was how she got into the VIP tent. But he barely registered it as he took in the bracelet on her wrist. The silver bracelet with the heart charm. Josh could only stare at Katie, but she didn't seem to notice, talking animatedly before she excused herself to use the bathroom. He watched her go into the makeshift single cubicle off to the side, saving them all from having to wander back out to the portaloos. She died in 2017. Josh had memorized the case in detail. He was never someone who was particularly into true crime, but having known someone who was murdered made things different. He'd followed all the details and would check in for updates every few years whenever something reminded him. What were the chances Katie would be in a memory they'd chosen for nostalgia? Josh grabbed another drink and went to stand just outside the tent to give himself a moment to clear his head before he went back inside. He knew there was nothing to be done for Katie. She was just a memory. He knew he should just enjoy the rest of his time in the experience, but the eeriness of seeing his long-dead friend was hard to shake. He stood there for a few minutes, trying to get back in the party mood. He was about to turn back to enter the tent when Katie came rushing out. She was crying. Josh experienced his strongest sense of déjà vu yet when he asked if she was okay. This happened the first time. Her coming out of the tent crying, him asking if she was okay. Katie tried to hide her tears behind her hair, and Josh gently took hold of her wrists. She told him not to worry about it and had mustered a smile, trying to shake him off to leave. Josh looked down, bewildered at where his skin was in contact with hers. After a moment, he let her wrists go. He was sure of it, but he turned around to watch her walk away so he could check again. Katie was no longer wearing the bracelet. She had been wearing it when Josh was chatting to her inside. Then about 15 minutes later, as she exited the tent, she no longer had it on. It couldn't be a coincidence. Josh knew Katie was not seen wearing that bracelet for 3 years before she died. And here they were, in the early hours of Sunday, 7th of September 2014. Katie was estimated to have died November 28th, 2017. 3 years away. What were the chances he'd landed at precisely the moment she'd lost her bracelet? It couldn't be luck. It had to be his memory dredging up the one detail no one else could have known. That he'd spoken to Katie here. He can't imagine he would have ever mentioned it to anyone. It was so insignificant to him at the time. He didn't even remember it after she died. He struggled to understand the weight of it. Somewhere in the recesses of his mind alone was a piece of information that could have led to getting Katie justice. It was buried in so much meaningless nonsense. He still remembered Manu's landline phone number from when they were kids. Why couldn't that have been kicked out to make room for this? Josh went back into the tent to see if any of his friends could make sense of it, when Shanti came storming out in a rush, almost knocking him into the dirt. She tried to say a quick sorry and keep going, but Josh stopped her. It dawned on him that this had happened the first time around too. Shanti was clearly very upset and told him she was leaving. He asked why. She looked back into the tent, as though she was afraid someone was going to follow her out. She told him,
"They're crazy. You shouldn't stay with that group, Josh. Watch out for them."
He brushed Shanti off as drunk and upset the first time this happened. But now, with Katie's lost bracelet burning in his thoughts, her warning sounded like a scream in the dark. His heart thudded. Something in his gut told him to run after her and ask questions, to demand answers from an echo who likely couldn't provide them. Josh knew there was no real point. He'd need to do what he always did and turn over the information in his head, hoping a conclusion would appear to him. He refused to believe his friends could drive Katie to anger or worse. There wasn't enough to go on, and yet, Katie and Shanti both bolting and upset, within seconds of each other. And here he stood, right on top of the clue that might crack Katie's murder wide open. It felt less like a coincidence, and more like a trapdoor swinging beneath his feet. He never saw Shanti again. Neither, it seemed, did anyone else. In those days, he barely registered her absence. He'd known her for only a few whirlwind hours. He didn't think Ashley and Nicolina ever saw her again. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself they'd had a falling out, but he had no idea where that assumption came from. Now, when he recalled the panic in Shanti's eyes, a raw, wild terror refreshed only by his data-fueled memory, he couldn't fathom how he'd missed it the first time.
The Cold Case of Katie Christie.
The story continues in the next episode.